Can everyone see that okay?
I can see it.
Awesome.
Should I turn myself off? No, I'll go ahead because it feels weird if I'm turning myself off.
It's up to you. Well, as I explained earlier, this talk came about because of the cancellation of our Western Canadian Reason Conference. We Can Reason, we decided to call it. And we wanted to kind of promote it for when we're rescheduling it, which is next year. And I came up with the idea of talking about becoming a Wikipedia editor because I've learned a lot, for one thing, and there's some pretty funny stories that I've learned about. So hopefully you will find this entertaining. And we are hoping to do these webinars every month through the Atheist Society of Calgary. So if you're interested, you can certainly join up, and we'll be having different talks every month, hopefully, or month and a half, until the actual conference, which is on May 14th to 15th. The 14th is sort of going to be a social get-together, registration, get your package on the Friday evening, and then we're having talks starting in the morning on the 15th, as long as the pandemic is over. We're hoping that we will be able to do this. And of course, it's featuring our favorite leader, Susan Gerbic, and Yasmin Mohammed. Those are our two keynote speakers, and we're going to have lots of other speakers in between. We already have some of them lined up, and we're working on some others. So more details as we have them firmed up will come up. So please feel free to go to www.wecanreason.com, and I hope that we see you in Calgary on May 14th and 15th next year. And as the title of my talk notes, I've been on quite an adventure becoming a Wikipedia editor, and I really do hope to share some of the stories with you. I will not delve deeply into how to edit Wikipedia. That's, I think, Susan's job. She can train you on how to do that. And this is sort of a random collection of stories around me editing for the past 2 years and sort of how things came about. And I start with a long, long time ago. And I like to think that my skeptic mind really started to develop as a young child. My family was pretty skeptical, but they had Santa Claus. And I asked my dad when I was about 5 or 6 years old, if there's a Santa, why do all children not get presents? And this was a really proud moment for me, and I felt that I'd reasoned my way to outsmarting my parents. And my questioning did continue all the way through to university. And when I went into university, hence the math symbols, I went into science, in particular the mathematics. And my main reasoning was so that I wouldn't have to write an essay and or do labs. I didn't like writing. I did not consider myself a good writer. I can't spell worth anything. Spell check cannot figure out what I'm trying to say. And if you'd said 30 years ago that I was going to be doing any kind of editing, I would have laughed and said there's no way. And my skeptical journey did continue. I ended up having 3 lovely sons, and they actually helped speed up my journey. And I want to introduce you to my oldest son, Graham. And he was the one that really started talking about logical fallacies. And I was very confused. I'd never heard of such things. And he would question me and my husband's statements very regularly. And he would buy me skeptical books like 59 Seconds, Change Your Life in Under a Minute, which is by Richard Wiseman, which is not a self-help book. It's actually countering self-help books. And The Homework Myth by Alfie Kohn were really influential in changing my thinking and how I was starting to think. But he was really instrumental in me becoming a Wikipedia editor with an event that happened 5 years ago. And it started in 2015 with this. It was a car accident that he was driving, Graham was driving in. It was a serious accident, but he was fine. He walked away from this thanks to the engineers at Ford. We were very grateful to them because not many people can walk away without any injuries in an accident this severe. But we found ourselves very suddenly in need of a car, and the only place we could find a car we wanted was in Taber, Alberta. And Taber is a really small community, and it's about a 3-hour drive from Calgary, where we live. And we asked Graham to drive back with us, drive there and back with us, since he was really, really nervous about getting behind the wheel again, understandably. And we thought the sooner he did it, the better it would be for him. And he decided to do it with the condition of listening to a podcast that he'd been listening to. And many of you probably know this podcast. I certainly did not at the time. I'd heard about it, but I'd never listened to it. And that's The Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. It's a real favorite of mine now. We had 6 hours straight of episodes. We played science or fiction. I became hooked. I couldn't get enough of these guys, and I listened to all the episodes with Cara Santa Marie. I haven't listened to a lot of the older versions, but I have listened to all of their newer stuff, and I couldn't get enough. So that's when I discovered I could read more on Steve Novella's Neurological Blot, who of course is on the SGU as well. And from there, I discovered there's something called science-based medicine, and this became everyday reading for me for a couple of years, until this article here came up, as you can see, in May 14th, 2018. And it says the null hypothesis, which captured my attention, being a mathematician. And I thought it was very clever play on words. And if you want to know what the null hypothesis is in mathematics, you can go look it up on Wikipedia. But it was basically, let me just get my little laser pointer going here. So essentially, it was talking about the last couple of weeks, one of the old men of quackery, a guy named Gary Null, hence the null hypothesis, has decided yet again that he really, really doesn't like science-based medicine. That includes Stephen Novella, Susan Gerbic, who I actually hadn't heard of before. My son Graham had, but I had never heard of her, and David Gorski. So this intrigued me. I wanted to read some more, and what I found, if I read on, is that there was this organization called the Guerilla Skepticism of Wikipedia, or GSoW. And this highlighted part in yellow really caught my mind, or caught my imagination. And it says, indeed, the slogan of GSoW is the mission of Guerilla Skepticism editing team is to improve skeptical content of Wikipedia. We do this by improving pages of our skeptical spokespeople, providing noteworthy citations and removing the unsourced claims from paranormal and pseudoscientific pages. Why? And this part here is what I really loved, is because evidence is cool. I thought that was a really neat statement, a fun statement. It said, we train, we mentor, and join us. And around this time, I got notification that my school was closing, and I had to kind of make the decision whether I wanted to carry on at a new school full-time or if I wanted to retire. And I made the decision that I didn't want to work full-time and I wanted to do something else. So I thought, I'm going to contact Susan. Even though I love my job, I love teaching, it was something that I didn't want to leave, but I thought this will be a really exciting and new move forward. So I contacted Susan, and of course, here we are, we meet Susan Gerbic. I love these photographs. I think that it really shows her personality. She's a former JCPenney photographer, and of course now in charge of over 130 volunteer Wikipedia editors from around the world. And her main personal beef, of course, is with psychics, which she refers to as Greek vampires, hence her third eye in the one picture. And of course, wearing a turkey on her head, probably, I think she told me it was for Thanksgiving. And she oversees all things pseudoscientific. So you don't have to be into Greek vampires. You can look into any pseudoscientific topic. One of the great things that has happened as a result of me joining this group is I've got to talk to people from all around the world, from the UK, Australia, Germany, the Netherlands, Czech Republic, South Africa, Mexico, Argentina, and of course the US and Canada. There's only one other editor in Canada that I know of, and he's in Montreal, and we've become friends. It's really cool. And there are people I've not been in contact with that are from other countries. So this is just a list of people, countries that I've actually been directly in contact with. I find the editors in this group extremely welcoming, and I've learned that any question that I pose at all is without judgment. They do not make you feel stupid. They're extremely helpful and respectful. And Susan is available anytime, which is amazing to me that she has maintained this level of connection with all her editors. I feel like we're part of her family. Now, one of the things that I think is a strength of, is how they proactively try to create these articles. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop and her Netflix show Goop Lab. The GSoW were aware that the Netflix series was about to launch, and there was a lot being written about it by reliable sources before its release. So Rob Palmer, one of our Wikipedia editors, was able to write a page that he published 12 days before the release of the show. And after the release, there were a lot more criticisms, and he was able to add those to the page. One of the things that Susan does is she keeps track of all of these articles if they're rewritten. So a major rewrite or a brand new article is we keep track of the number of views that happen. So if it's just a small edit, like a comma being done or a sentence added or a paragraph added, we won't keep track of it. That would be overwhelming. So this particular article we did keep track of, and there was a huge spike in views once it aired on Netflix. So it really shows how important it is to be on top of some of these big news items when it comes to pseudoscience. So going forward from here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on how to edit Wikipedia, as I said before, but I'm going to share some of my training experiences. Training time expectations. This is something you train at your own pace. It usually takes a pretty set amount of time. The fastest training that we've seen is 4 days, and apparently 2 people have accomplished the training within 4 days. The longest training, I have that dubious honor, that was 18 months, and that was due to health issues. Around the time that I was just about to create my final project, yes, there's a final project. So I'd gone through all the training and I was about to finish, and I started experiencing chronic migraines and cluster headaches due to my wonderful age. And I couldn't walk and I couldn't drive, so let alone sit in front of a computer to complete my training. And I was about a year away from the training. But the expected length of time is about 4 months. So plus or minus a little bit. And Susan was great. I stayed in contact with her through the whole thing. She knew what was going on. She was very understanding. And to be honest, reading the stuff that was going on and the Facebook page where we hang out, which is called the Secret Cabal, I call it the not so secret cabal. And I found that that was really important when I was not well. So I'm grateful to her continued support through that time. Now let's take a look at what my final project was. When I was finally ready to begin my project, it was a year later, as I said. And the list of projects that Susan keeps for the trainees are mostly on biographies of scientists or science communicators. But it can be on anything. And those types of final projects are relatively quick. So doing a biography is not going to take you a lot of time. But because I've been away for a year from the training, I thought I needed something beefier to get the process firmly implanted into my brain. I needed something that was going to take me some time that really solidified editing in Wikipedia. So I looked for something that was really interesting. And this particular item, which is the haunted house page, it had a little warning on it saying that it was going to be a big project. And apparently it had been on the book since 2013. And I really knew nothing about haunted houses. Haunted houses were something, in my view, that were found in movies, they were found in books, but nobody really believed in it because that was my family, that was where I came from. And I didn't really think that it was a thing until I read more about it. And I decided to read as much as I could because I really was not informed on this topic at all. And I read 2 books by Benjamin Radford, particularly this one, Investigating Ghosts, a Scientific Search for Spirits, and the book, The Haunted, A Social History of Ghosts by Ellen Davies. And these are really great books, and they really introduced me to the folklore of not just haunted houses, but of ghosts. And it was a real learning curve for me. I also read a lot online. There was a lot of articles by Kenny Biddle, who's one of the people I read a lot about, and I quoted him in the article. And one of the criticisms on the actual Wikipedia page before I fixed it was that the focus was on North America and European haunted houses, and that a more global take was needed in the article. And as a result, for today, I'm not going to talk about anything North America. I think that if you want to do that, then you can go to my Wikipedia page and read about it. So things like the Amityville Horror, I'm not going to discuss, or any of the famous haunted houses in North America. So I'm going to start though, especially because my belief in ghosts, obviously I didn't realize it was a thing. So I'm going to start with my own country, which is Canada. And according to a poll done just recently in 2020, 40% of Canadian women and 25% of Canadian men believe in haunted houses. That was eye-opening to me, that it was so prevalent. And for the next thing, I also read this book called The Woo Woo by Lindsay Wong. And it's a book about her life in Vancouver, here in Canada, not Vancouver, Washington. And within this book, there's a huge belief in ghosts. She's Chinese, of Chinese heritage. And because of this book, I thought, is it just this family, or is this more prevalent in Asian society? And so I went into the internet and found more information on haunted houses around the world. And I found some amazing things for both China and Japan, some very surprising and fascinating stories. And here's one of them. I found out that if there's a death in a house in China, the property values devalue tremendously. And this is a web page that has a list of all the haunted houses, so-called haunted houses, that are in Hong Kong. And if you notice here, it says the most up-to-date Hong Kong haunted houses database. So I took this screenshot last week. And if you notice, it says showing 15 of 3,562 haunted houses. And this is on an actual real estate page. And you can see it shows what happened. A man fell on a building from this garden and was found dead. And in this one, a 41-year-old woman fell off with her 71-year-old mother in Metro City. So you can see that they take it very, very seriously in China. Also in China, Wuhan, I'd never heard of Wuhan before. I learned about this in November last year. And now we all know where Wuhan is after the pandemic. They have actually a haunted house to train their police in. Because of the culture of fear and belief in ghosts, they have to train their police officers to go into where crimes have been committed and where people may be dead because of ghost fears. So they fill dilapidated houses with fake severed limbs, bone skulls. They have a frightening atmosphere that includes rain and lightning and thunder. And they try to build up the officer's nerve to make sure that they can actually perform their duties. Now, this next one should be a house that's familiar to most people. This is the Disney Haunted Mansion. And what's interesting about this is when they were going to build Disneyland in Shanghai, they decided not to build the house there. It's the only Disneyland that does not have the Haunted Mansion in it. And they did that because of the cultural beliefs about ghosts and hauntings. Building the house would have been considered a mockery of their fear. So next we're going to move to Japan. And we're going to go to the super scary Labyrinth of Fear Haunted Hospital. I think it's my favorite name for a haunted house ever. And that's what it actually is, at least in the translation. This is what it's called. And it's a Japanese commercial haunted house, or I'm going to try my best to pronounce this. It's Obakayashiki. There we go. It's about as good as it's going to get. And they are considered to be some of the best commercial haunted houses in the world. And their experiences range from being chased by gore-covered zombies to specially themed attractions such as schools or hospital wards, such as the super scary Labyrinth of Fear. Houses escape houses where you have 60 minutes to get out, or you're going to be found by quote unquote slaughtering criminals. And this particular haunted house, this super scary labyrinth of fear, it claims to be the world's largest and most frightening haunted house. And it depicts horrific visual scenes such as shrill cries, moans, and smells from a hospital setting. One of the things that this is based on, it's a tradition linked to Buddhism, and creating the ghost houses was traditionally done in August, when it was believed that the ancestral visits would actually visit. And people will go to ghost houses to listen to frightening stories, and they have elaborate decorations and costumes, and the main purpose is to experience shivers as a way to feel cooler in the hot summer temperatures. Now that I was basically finished my project, because remember, I can't write, I can't spell, or at least I don't feel I'm a very good writer. I have my two sons. I can't feel like I can't mention one without my other one. This is my youngest son, Troy. This is my dog, Jewel, who helps me edit by sitting at my feet. And this is my middle boy, Cameron. And these two were really helpful with my editing and making sure that it sounded like a Wikipedia article. They're very astute. And I also had my husband review it before I finally had the courage to post it in the Secret Cabal. And once I did, I got more advice. Everybody was kind, they had great suggestions, and I had a fair amount to do again, did that, including rewriting the lead. But I felt like it was a really accepting group, and it was really exciting to be able to finish my project. So I finally posted, and then Susan says to me, oh, I'm going to ask Ben Radford, who is of course the author of the 2 books that I had read, to go over my page. And that introduced some nerves, to say the least, because this is somebody who sort of was at a distance and that I admired, who had some really great books, and here he was going to be reviewing the article. And he contacted me directly, and even though I was intimidated, I feel like now after him contacting me, I feel like I have a new friend. He was very complimentary about the page, and he had some great additions for me to use along with a few corrections. So between all these people, I feel like we came up with a fairly good article about haunted houses. So one of the things that now that I know Ben Radford is I have a much more interesting Facebook feed than I used to. I have, because of all the skeptical connections, I get some really interesting things come up. And this was one of the things that I found. And this was on Ben Radford's feed, and he gave me permission to use it. And he said a friend of his sent it. It's a 90-second video, and I'm going to play it for you. And there was something weird on her doorbell camera. I'm sure many of you have noticed many different things about ghosts and fairies and angels and things being on doorbell cameras or security cameras at night. And he says he gets these similar types of ghost videos routinely. So I'm going to play it. Hopefully I can figure out how to do this again. Oh yeah, I have to take off the laser pointer. And I'll just let it run. And you'll watch the bottom right-hand corner. That's where you're going to see the ghost appear. There it is. And when I was doing this with my group last week, I was asking them questions. What do you think it is? And they were saying, oh, it's a hair or a piece of spider web or an antenna, a moth. They were giving all kinds of different possibilities. But we'll keep watching, and it will reveal itself eventually. Because of it's a wide angle lens, you're going to have a lot of distortion with the image. So we're not 100% sure what it is, but we've kind of narrowed it down to 2 possibilities. It was about that point that everybody realized that it was most likely a tick, but it could easily be a spider as well. I think that we could agree, though, that it's most likely, or a certain explanation would not be a ghost. So from here, I wanted to talk a little bit about vandalism. I feel a little bit like my article arrived when it got vandalized. And you can see the vandalism that's happened in the blue here. And I'm going to turn this back on. There we go. It says, well, those people are individuals that like to come over and listen to what? Harass That's Haunted. You can see that this is clearly not trying to make the article better. This is what would definitely be classed as vandalism. And I had my page on a watch list so that I was notified that anytime there's a change, I get notified. So I was certainly notified for this. But what interests me, I think, the most here is how quickly the vandalism was reverted. And you can see here that it was reverted at the same time it was created, essentially. It was created at 6:28 on May 22nd, 2020, and it was reverted at the same time. And if you look here, it was reverted by ClueBot. So this is a bot that figured out that this was probably vandalism and got rid of it. And you know, I don't know if any of you have seen vandalism on Wikipedia. It usually occurs after a significant event like a Super Bowl or an election, which is coming up. So you can go on to, say, Donald Trump's page and see if there's any vandalism that starts to happen if it's not locked, because there are pages that get locked if they're vandalized too often. But I really do feel like my article has made it, because I got vandalized. So one of the things that happened recently is Susan asked me to do an edit on last week on one of her favorite people, and that's Jeanette Wilson. And if you notice here, I've highlighted her birthday, and her birthday has an age range. It doesn't have a specific date. And all information has to come from a reliable source. So if you can't find the exact date, you cannot just go in and talk to Jeanette Wilson and say, hey, how old are you? And then change the Wikipedia page. It has to come from a reliable source. And what's a reliable source? Well, obviously Wikipedia, you can just go on Wikipedia and look at their guidelines. It tells you what the reliable sources are, but you can also use things like Media Bias Fact Checked, Web of Trust, and NewsGuard. The last two they're extensions for Chrome that gives you an alert and warns you if the site can be trusted that you go to. Whereas Media Bias Fact Check, you actually go to it, put in a URL link, and then it will try and evaluate it. But all of these are good, and I also use Susan, and I also use the Cabal. If I'm not sure, because I can't find a lot of information about a source, I will ask somebody, and they're always very helpful. Now this next slide is going back to Jeanette Wilson, and Susan had asked me to read Katie Biddle's article from Skeptical Inquirer, which is a reliable source, and to add the information onto Wilson's page. And one of the things that Kenny did was he looked at the photographs to explain what they really were. Now, if you look really closely at this picture, Jeanette Wilson claims that in this picture, there's a man and a dog, and there's spirits, and the spirits that have to be removed from the house. And if you look really closely, this is the only thing I could find are these two legs. Very, very faint. I don't see a dog, but maybe you've better eyes than me, you can see the dog. But apparently this represents a spirit. I'm an amateur photographer, and I was astounded that people actually thought that stuff like this could represent spirits or ghosts. And I actually do these things intentionally sometimes for fun, or sometimes it accidentally happens and I get an artifact that happens, but I've never once thought that they were ghosts. So we're going to go and try and find some ghosts in some of my photos now. This is the Chicago bean, and I took using a long exposure. And what that means is the shutter is open, it's left open for seconds to minutes, And in that time, it's collecting data. And if people, while you have the shutter open, if people walk through really quickly, you won't see them at all. So there are a number of people that actually walked right through this photo. You can't see them in the least. If they stop, so if you look here, over in this area here, you can see there's somebody. They've stopped for quite a while before moving on. So you can see through them, but they're fairly clear. Same with here. This person's quite clear. So they also stopped for a fair length of time before moving on. Now, if you look really, really closely, you can see some legs here, sort of like in the legs in the last photo I showed you. These people stopped for a shorter period of time, and therefore you can't see their whole bodies. You can just see their legs, and you have to look really hard to be able to even see them. But I don't call them ghosts. I know where they came from. Oh, and there's some more ghosts over here. Look at that. And at a workshop, a group of us got together to create some quote-unquote ghosts. And a little warning about the next slide, the ghosts are a little bit lewd. And here they are. There's 5 ghosts. And this is what we call light painting. Long exposures again. And there's actually 5 people standing there with flashlights. And they're drawing out these people. And this is what they drew with their flashlights. And if you look really, really closely, you can see there's some feet there, and there's some feet down here that may be harder to see on certain screens, but there's actually 5 people standing behind each of those ghosts, creating them with a flashlight. Now, one of the other things that I found really interesting with Kenny Biddle's article, as well as Ben Radford's stuff in his books, is if you look carefully here, you can see 2 little orbs. And those that want to get you to believe that these are spiritual beings would say that they're orbs. And they're actually just dust spots that are really close to my lens that are reflecting the light. And they're not ghosts or spirits. So it's really interesting because I really had no idea until I read articles by Kenny Biddle and the books by Ben Radford that people really took the stuff seriously. They took it as anomaly, the anomalies like dust spots, lens flare, see-through people from long exposures, and they thought they were actually ghosts and spirits. I really was not aware of that. So back to my particular page, my ghost page. As I said before, Susan keeps track of how many views we've had. And this was, I actually took the screenshot today. I've published the article on March 13th, 2020. And since that time, I've had 43,637 views, which I think is pretty amazing. Makes me feel very good. It makes me feel like what I'm doing is worthwhile. I don't know if they've read the whole article or if they just glanced at it and looked for a specific thing, but they have actually visited the page. Last 30 days, over 10,000, and the last 7 days, 1,884. I find usually I have between 2,000 and 3,000 every week. I'm a little lower this week, maybe because summer, who knows, but it's pretty thrilling to see this number continue to grow and get bigger. And talking about everybody's pages, so all of GSoW, and I believe it's about 1,400 pages altogether, and it's been in the last 5 years that they've actually been keeping records. So for GSoW all time, we have almost 65 million. I'm a math teacher, got the number wrong. 65 million views. And for just the last month, almost 1.7 million views. And in the last 7 days, almost 300,000 views. I think that's pretty amazing. So if you're going to have an impact on pseudoscience, I think this is a great place to try and have an impact. Now I'm going to change direction for a few slides. We're not going to talk ghosts anymore. And I'm just going to talk about a couple more weird and wonderful things that I've come across since becoming an editor. And one of the things, because I've met through online, I met Ben Radford. I discovered he has this wonderful podcast called Squaring the Strange. And if all things weird and wonderful interest you, I would highly recommend you check it out. I've been really enjoying it, finding out things that I had no idea about. And it's hosted by Pasquale Romero, Ben Radford, and Celestia Ward. And it started running in April 2017, so it's a fairly new podcast. It hasn't been around that long, but they discuss many very strange things, but my favorite one is probably the folklore about the Jamaican duppy. And one of the things I've learned from Ben is that when you're traveling to foreign countries, it can be really interesting to try to learn about the local folklore. And he tends to ask taxi drivers about it to try and learn more about the local customs. And then he seeks out local artists and commissions them to make carvings, paintings, etc. And so it's something I've learned that I think I'm going to try and do when I travel now. And here is the dreaded duppy that I was mentioning. And this is an artist that he commissioned to carve what he thought a duppy looked like. And really they're regarded as malevolent spirits. So they're ghosts, another form of ghosts. And they're said to come out mostly at night. They haunt people at night, and people from all over the Caribbean islands, not just Jamaica, have claimed to have seen these. And there are different types of duppies, all kinds of different ones. I think this one's a moon one. I didn't write it down, something like that. And you can actually protect yourself from these malevolent spirits by using something called duppy repellent, which can be purchased at local stores. And I tried to find some online, couldn't find it. Apparently it's very localized. One of the most feared duppies is this character here called the rolling calf. It's considered to be the most dangerous duppy. And it's rolling meaning roaming, like roaming around, walking around. And it refers to the duppy's habit of walking through towns in the nightly hours. It's a shapeshifter that can appear in a number of guises, but most often chooses to be a hornless goat, white or spotted, with extraordinarily long, strong stench, so smell. One of its front legs is human, the other is a horse. The two hind legs are those of a goat. Its tail curls back over its back, its eyes are red and glow like blazing fires. Flames come out from its nostrils, as depicted in this painting. And from its collar, a chain drags. There's the chains. We've got the chains up here as well. And they drag on the ground and they rattle ominously. However, the rolling calf can also appear as a cat, a dog, a pig, a goat, a bull, or a horse. So you can see how the folklore can build based on it being anything. And this is kind of a neat piece of information I found on, of course, Wikipedia. The rolling calf appears in the James Bond novel, Live and Let Die by Ian Fleming. So I thought that was pretty cool. Now, changing directions from monsters and strange things happening, I want to talk a little bit about our other keynote speaker that we have coming to our conference. And this is Yasmin Mohammed, and she's just written a book called Unveiled. And when we were planning the conference, Susan and I noticed she didn't have a Wikipedia page. So it's become my task to try and look into that. And so I asked the cabal if she was notable enough, and they all came back with the information I provided, and they said, yes, I think she's notable, go for it. So I've gone ahead to try to make a good page for her that will hopefully stick. And I've learned some really amazing things. I didn't know a lot. She's an ex-Muslim. I didn't know a lot about the Muslim culture or the Islamic religion until I really started digging into her story. But I tend to get really excited about some interesting things that I find out, and I'll send them to Susan. Did you know this? Did you know that? And usually we have a good laugh. She has often not heard of the things I found, but this particular one she had heard of, but I had never heard of. So we'll have to see if people in the audience have heard of this or not. And that was called Draw Muhammad Day. Yasmin Mohammed in an interview was actually asked about this. What did she feel about it? She said that she wouldn't do it herself, but she doesn't get angry if somebody wants to participate. And what this was a result from was a South Park episode where they were going to be drawing Muhammad, and they got threats. And because of the threats, they pulled the episode, or they at least pulled the drawing from the episode. And this cartoonist named Molly Norris, she claimed that if everybody draws on a specific day, they draw Muhammad, the radical Islamic people would not be able to go after everybody and threaten everybody because too many people were doing it. And apparently it's something that happens every year, though it was started on April 20th, 2010. So I sent this to Susan and said, have you ever heard of this? And she went, yeah, I've heard of this. Have you heard of Bootquake? Of course, I had to look into that. I'd never heard of Bootquake before. And it was a rally which took place, again, in 2010, April 26, 2010. And the rally served to protest the news reports of some controversial beliefs that were held by an Islamic religious authority in Iran, and his name was Siddiqui. And he blamed women who dressed immodestly for causing earthquakes. So what he said was, many women who do not dress modestly lead young men astray, corrupt their chastity, and spread adultery in society, which increases earthquakes, and Iranians should adapt their lives to Islam's moral codes to avoid being buried under the rubble. In response to this young lady here, and her name is Jennifer McCrate, she invited people to dress in your immodest clothing to represent Bootquake. And she described it as a scientific experiment because she said, hey, this is a testable claim that cleavage or dressing immodestly will cause earthquakes. So let's test it out. And so she said, with the power of our scandalous bodies combined, we should surely produce an earthquake. If not, I'm sure Siddiqui can come up with a rational explanation for why the ground didn't rumble. About 200,000 people participated on April 26th, and she compiled some data beforehand to try and get the likelihood of whether or not an earthquake should happen on the day when they did the Bootquake. And she determined within a 95% confidence interval that between 0 and 148 daily earthquakes would be fine. That would be within the norm. And during the course of Bootquake, they only had 47 earthquakes. And so as a result of the analysis, of course, she concluded that immodest clothing worn during Bootquake had no significant effect on earthquake frequency or magnitude. And although she admits that there are some flaws with the experimental procedure and that she doubted it would actually change Siddiqui's opinions, she believed that the event fulfilled its original intentions, which were being a humorous exercise in scientific and skeptical thinking. So those are sort of the last of my fun things. Well, I've found other fun things, but the most fun things that I've discovered while being a GSoW editor. And if you're interested, I really want people to know that I think I've really found my people within this group. And I want people to remember that I am not a writer. I don't consider myself a writer, but I love being part of this project. And if you think you would like to join this project through the About Time project, then here's what you need to do. You will need to friend Susan on Facebook. Yes, Facebook is what she uses, and it has, I have to admit, been highly effective. I am not a Facebook user usually, but have become so because of this project. You need to create a Wikipedia account. You need to send her through Messenger, Facebook Messenger, your new Wikipedia username and your email address. And she will send you a pre-training exercise to make sure that you think this is what you would like to do. And the last thing I would like to remind everybody about is our Western Canadian Reason Conference, which of course features our fearless leader, Susan Gerbic, and Yasmin Mohammed. I think it's going to be a really great day, and I really hope it happens, and that we still aren't dealing with a pandemic.